the point of doing a PhD is to learn new things, and you don't necessarily learn about your topic of research. You also learn some weird things along the way. I've learnt a lot of weird things that I would not have learnt had I not been doing a PhD. So has Fiona.
Yeah, a lot of very odd things that just completely come out of left field.
So this is going to be a video about some of the weird things we have learnt doing PhDs. So this started in my very first week of PhD, where I had some weird experiences that I decided those 4 years ago now to write down, because I needed to remember these for posterity, and this is what it's turned into. So there are a couple of weird stories from my first week of PhD, but the one that made me realise I had to write this down was I'd got through my first week of PhD, and we were having beers on the roof of the physics building, which is something we did every Friday at the institute I did my PhD at. And there's a fun fact, we called it the Rooftop Symposium in order to not have the word beer going round in the email chain.
I like that.
I later learned that symposium is Greek for drinking party.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Because the Greek philosophers would sit round, drink copious amounts of wine and talk philosophy. So symposium just means drinking party.
Oh, that's amazing. That completely changes several conferences I've been to be an accurate description of what actually happened.
So that's why it was called Rooftop Symposium.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's something weird I learned during my PhD. But during my first Rooftop Symposium, I'd got to the end of my first week of PhD. My supervisor had been away that week, my first week of PhD. I'd managed to get through with only breaking one very minor thing. I'd snapped a cable that was easy to fix later on. I'd made it through, and we're having beers on the roof, and it was the 50th birthday of one of the workshop technicians. And the other workshop technicians had banded together and got him a voucher for a brothel. Brothels are legal businesses now, and so they have vouchers. You can buy a voucher.
Was this a physical, like, shiny Charlie's Golden Ticket voucher, or was this like a one that they've grab one that they've printed out on the office printer?
I don't know. He was given it in an envelope, and I was told this story by him and the other workshop technicians later in the day.
Right.
But the bit that makes it really weird is that, okay, that's a great idea for a joke. Like, maybe let's get our mate a $50 voucher for a brothel as a joke, because you could spend $50 on a joke.
Yeah.
It was a $400 voucher.
You don't even spend that on a bottle of wine for a colleague, in my experience. That's
Are they expecting
wild.
him to use it? So that was 4 years ago. I don't know if he used it.
I don't want to know if he used it. Like, I don't want to hear, like, I don't want a thank you card from that present. Like, I really don't want to receive that thank you card.
If you're watching this video, don't tell me. Just, I don't want to know. So after that, I decided I need to write this stuff down. And so I have kept a list of the weird stuff I have learned over the course of my PhD. And I also got Fiona to start noting it down.
I've got a list, which this was come up with in about 20 minutes last night, I think.
What weird stuff has happened?
And this was only like the best ones. There was a lot more weird stuff that I haven't actually written down. So, I'm going to keep writing this stuff down, because academia is just really strange. Something about science attracts the weirdest and the craziest people. But the craziest people that I have encountered are definitely Russians.
Oh.
I've got so many crazy Russian stories.
I've got some good Russian stories.
So my favourite crazy Russian story was my university, my research school, we built a telescope, which was mostly built up out of off-the-shelf parts. So you can actually go onto a website and be like, I want this dome, I want this CCD, I want this filter set. And the filter set that we ordered came from Russia. It was the only place in the world that they would do the filters that we wanted. So one of the people who was involved in the telescope building process got online, and he orders this filter set. And they take quite a long time to come, actually to the point they actually have to get in contact with the company and be like, hey guys, can you send us these filters, because we ordered them a really long time ago. And eventually they do come in a box. So rip off the brown paper packaging, and it's quite thin. So it's quite a thin sort of square box. I'm thinking, yeah, well, filters are very thin, but they're generally quite large, and so this is expected. Rip the brown paper off, and inside there is this pizza box. It's an actual pizza box with a picture of the pizza on the front, and it says like Pizza Bravo in Russian or something. It definitely says. I've actually seen the boxes. They're in somebody's office at work. They still have the boxes. And they opened up the box to see the filters, and the filters are sandwiched between sheets of, what's it called? Tissue paper, that's the one. So these are sort of sandwiched in between, and they lift everything up. And lo and behold, there is actually like the outline of pizza grease on the bottom of the box, and there is a nice little bit of cheese and ham in there as well,
wow.
with the filters.
No pineapple?
No pineapple, sadly. No. There may have been some evidence of an olive, but no pineapple.
So actual cheese.
Actual cheese! And like the grease stain from the pizza came with the filter set, which just was wild.
Were there any grease stains on the filter set? Did they have to be cleaned?
I think they were okay because they were sandwiched in the tissue paper. So I think and there was a bit of cardboard, but we do still have the pizza boxes. They still have the grease stain on the bottom, which I actually think is really gross, and I think they need to be thrown away, but we keep them because...
No, that's worth preserving.
But no, this whole telescope is just... There's a range of mad stories, but that's probably the craziest.
Dare I ask what telescope that is?
That's the Sky Mapper telescope.
Right, okay. Yeah. Your baby.
Yeah, one of my babies, yeah.
Right, okay, that's amazing. So, my crazy Russian story also involves telescopes and cleaning things in a certain regard. So, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, CSIRO, does research in many things: agriculture, health, climate science, and radio astronomy. And they run several radio astronomy observatories, including the Australia Telescope Compact Array. I visited the Australia Telescope Compact Array to run some tests on it as part of my PhD, and when I was there I was told a story about some bits that had been delivered by the Russians. Lots of observatories, especially radio observatories, have atomic clocks called hydrogen masers, which are used to synchronize across the observatory, and also synchronize that observatory to other observatories around the world so they can work together and share data that's very carefully time-stamped, so it can all be put together into one big computer. So they bought 3 of these hydrogen masers off the Russians, and the Russians came, so this is the late 80s that telescope was finished. So the Russians came, installed these 3 hydrogen masers, got them up and running, calibrated them, and left. Apparently, a couple of months later, a crate arrived that was labelled maser cleaning fluid. Now the story diverges a bit here. The storytellers agree that the crate contained premium Russian vodka, and that was just how the Russians had got a huge quantity, gallons of vodka, through
Without
Australian
paying any
customs without paying customs. They'd got it through as maser cleaning fluid. But then the story diverges. So some of the CSIRO employees tell me that they think it was a thank you gift that the CSIRO, for buying 3 really expensive hydrogen masers, that the CSIRO people then drank.
Right.
The other version of that story sometimes contains the fact that CSIRO also drank it, but the other version of the story is that the Russians are meant to come back and service those masers every 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
And they had decided that they couldn't get good vodka in Australia. So they had sent this pre-supply of vodka so that when they come to service the masers, there is good vodka waiting for them at the observatory. And so the story goes that the CSIRO had already drank it, and so the Russians were annoyed that they couldn't get it. And some stories go they hadn't drunk it, and so there was premium Russian vodka ready for the crazy Russians to come and service the telescope.
Wow.
I got a lot of good stories out of that trip. The other good one, so I did a blog post on this at some point, animals getting in the way of science.
Oh yeah, that's That's a common. I think I don't know if that's a generic science thing or really like an astronomy thing. Maybe it's a generic science
suppose there
thing.
are fields of science where animals get in the way more. Like, as an experimental physicist, I didn't expect animals to be getting in the way that often.
Because you'd think you'd be in a lab, which is sealed.
Well, they do. Kangaroos, possums. In this case, cockatoos. So a big white bird called a cockatoo has a hooked beak. It is for breaking open nuts and chewing through hard things. And they like to sharpen their beaks by chewing on certain things like fence posts, wooden fence posts. They will chew on to sharpen their beaks. So I guess the same way the child might teeth on something.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
Slightly less pointy, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I haven't been in very close proximity to either children or cockatoos, thankfully.
Both bite.
Yes, both bite. So the cockatoos had taken a liking to the insulation around the high voltage cables.
Oh, because that's like...
That's 15 kilovolts. So
it's actually around the outside they put... Oh.
So certain parts of the telescopes are run on 15,000 volt cables.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And the cockatoos had taken a liking to this and started chewing through the big thick insulation around it. Probably just because this thick rubber insulation was the right consistency, that it felt good as they chewed on it.
Yeah.
But the CSIRO employees, the CSIRO engineers who had to deal with this problem, think that it's more than that. Because this caused the telescope to have to be shut down because the birds had chewed through so much of this insulation. And so they shut down the telescope, replaced the cables, and put steel mesh over the cables to prevent the cockatoos getting back at it. The cockatoos tore open the steel mesh, tore it away from where it had been screwed down.
They've got really powerful beaks.
Yeah,
I mean, they're
they're
strong.
really powerful birds. And it was just steel mesh, so they could rip through it if they wanted. So they got through this steel mesh to get back at the cables, and they chewed through the cables again. So the CSIRO technicians think that there's something more to this than just the rubber. They think that the birds were enjoying the buzz because they were getting through just barely to
They're getting zapped, and it was like...
a little bit.
Oh.
So, because this is AC electricity, so
They
it's
feel
buzzing.
Tingly.
So as they get through, they'll feel this tingle, this buzz in their beak. And so they think the cockatoos were getting a buzz off chewing through just to the right level, not to the point where it shocked them with 15,000 volts, but to the point where enough of it was leaking through that they were getting a buzz.
Well, you see these birds playing all the time. I can really imagine that would be... Yeah, that I can definitely see that happening. Oh, there's a lunar. I wonder if maybe this is an Australian thing. I don't know if birds actually or animals in general interfere with stuff in other countries, because there's a few animal stories, and one also involves the Sky Mapper telescope. So the telescope has kind of been famous that it's gone through its years of having problems, and we've had various plagues. The ham and cheese plague of the pizza boxes.
Plague of ham and cheese just descending on the telescope?
I don't see why that's a problem.
This is a delicious catastrophe.
So we've had ice. So the coolant system vibrated the telescope to the point we had to isolate the telescope from the coolant system. We've had fire. The telescope nearly burnt down in 2013. There's actually a video of that somewhere on YouTube, which is quite terrifying to watch.
I know there's a video of Mopra.
Yeah, it's the Mopra one. Yeah, it's the same fire. Yeah.
So we're Australian. We live in I'm Australian.
I live in Australia.
Yeah. We live in a country that's mostly on fire. Your house is nearly burned down. Two observatories I've been involved with have nearly burned down. We're a very flammable country.
Yeah. So we've had the fire plague, we've had darkness, because the CCD failed, so the camera, actually parts of the camera failed. But my favourite plague of all was the gigantic ladybird plague. These little...
gigantic ladybirds?
No, just regular bog standard little red and dotty ladybirds crawling around. Every few years, they come out in plague proportions. If the weather conditions are kind of just perfect, they breed to such an extent that you have millions upon millions of ladybirds descend on regional New South Wales. And one year we had the plague of ladybirds came in, and they just caked the telescope, basically. And they all got into where the dome rotates, and when the dome tried to rotate at night, it's all automated, it got stuck because there were so many ladybirds, it actually got into the gears and clogged them up. So this went on for a while, and then of course all ladybirds, unfortunately, they do eventually die. And they were able to sweep them all out, so sweeping out ladybird carcasses. And they found that there was still a problem with the telescope. So when the telescope was moving and tracking across the sky, it had this weird jitter on the images. So the stars would look really odd, jittered kind of images. And the reason why was because once the ladybirds had got in, they hadn't just gummed up the gears themselves, they'd actually got into the telescope gearing, and they'd pooped inside the telescope gearing. And it was the enormous quantity of ladybird poop that was actually stopping the telescope from rotating smoothly.
That's amazing.
So the whole enterprise has really been a series of
a multi-million-dollar telescope brought to a halt by ladybird poo.
Ladybird poo, yeah. It's not the most glamorous. I mean, everyone thinks, oh, astronomy is so glamorous. Astronomy is not glamorous at all.
Another really funny thing I learnt from that, we taught a little bit of Australian Aboriginal astronomy as well, and back when I first started, we'd occasionally have an Aboriginal elder or someone who'd been researching Aboriginal culture come in and talk about it. And because it's ancient culture to do with the stars, it's basically religion, so it ties in with their laws, things like that. So a lot of the stories about the stars relate to laws of the land or laws of the tribe. One thing I learnt is that across nearly all Aboriginal cultures across Australia, they have a law that you do not talk to your mother-in-law. She is off limits. You do not talk to her. She does not talk to you. No communication in any way, shape or form between you and your mother-in-law.
Is it so it's specifically like you and that? It's not like your whole family and the mother-in-law. It's just you and the mother-in-law.
And your mother-in-law.
Just no contact.
Not allowed to talk. Not allowed to have any communication.
Not allowed to text. No emails. No. I mean,
I presume that extends to modern communication methods.
That's really interesting because I can see in some situations that would probably be a good thing, but it's
one of those things. I mean, throughout culture, Western culture, we've got these mother-in-law jokes.
Yeah.
And the evil mother-in-law, the whole Everybody Loves Raymond series, which went for years, was just mother-in-law jokes. Yeah. Well, the Aboriginals solved it thousands of years ago. You do not talk to your mother-in-law at all. And it was a popular law. It spread across Australia.
Oh, that's amazing! Because so it's not just distinct to one tribal group. It's actually almost
so
universal.
Other laws were distinct, like certain tribes do not eat kingfish for certain reasons, or must not harm birds and not allowed to kill birds. Yeah. And so these are patchy laws, and things like circumcision was a patchy thing. Yeah. Certain regions of Australia did it. But this is one that was spread pretty much across the entirety of Australia.
That's crazy.
It must have been a very good law.
Yeah, it must have worked. So one of the things that I've learned is that in astronomy, just because something has been discovered once, even in antiquity, it doesn't mean we can't discover it again for a second time.
So is this like astronomers... radio astronomers, because they're not looking at a picture, often rediscover the moon or Jupiter?
Oh no, so it's not so much that they look up and go, that's a strange light in the sky, that must be something else, and it's actually the moon. It's not because they're like looking through a filter or something. Yeah. So if you do the kind of astronomy I do, which is transient astronomy, you're looking for things in the night sky which change. So if you're walking back to your car, like this astronomer of rather Nobel stature was one night, walking back to his car in the car park and looking west over this mountain range you can see from the observatory. You're trying to figure out which way is west.
I'm trying to work out which way is west.
So I'm pointing that way, but west's actually that way.
Right.
So he's looking out over the mountain range, and above the mountain range he sees a light in the sky that wasn't there yesterday. And he stands for a while, And he waits to see if it moves, because maybe it's a slow-moving aeroplane, like an aeroplane moving towards him, or maybe it's a satellite, or maybe it's even like someone shining a torch, or I don't know, something. There's like some kind of mirage. And he stands for about good 20-30 minutes and realizes that it's setting kind of at the same rate as the celestial sphere moves, so the same rate at which the sun is setting. And so he gets on the phone, because it's a new light in the sky. It's very bright, and it could be the next galactic supernova, which would be a huge thing for my research community.
Yep.
It's what we're waiting for, basically. He gets on the phone to the observatories and he says, guys, there's a new supernova. It's visible to the naked eye. You know, you gotta get it. Look at it now, because it's setting. It's going, below the horizon pretty soon. Get on there. And he drives home and he's really excited about this discovery. And then he gets a phone call back from an observatory who've actually...
Was it Venus?
No. So what had happened is the observatory, before they'd done the observation, we have this big book that gets printed out once a year called the Astronomical Almanac.
Right.
And it tells you on every day of the year the exact location of all of the planets in the sky. So you're right that it's a planet. It was Mercury, which can be really surprisingly bright at times. But the thing is, he's in good company, because recently an astronomer did actually rediscover Mars, and they got around to even sending out an astronomer's telegram, which was then rescinded about 3 hours later when he went and checked his almanac. So the moral of this story is always check your almanac.
And while we're talking about famous Brians, you met Brian... You got to meet Brian Cox.
I did get to meet Brian Cox, yes. So I'm a big Brian Cox fan now, actually, having met him. So I was involved in BBC Stargazing Live in 2017. Sorry, can't remember what year it is half the time. I was involved in Stargazing Live last year, 2017. Right, and Brian had come over to Australia to do this show, and I was there working on sort of a software pipeline, because we were trying to find Planet 9 during that show. So we kind of built everything on the fly that we needed to take the public's classifications and turn them into a real science output. And we were on a deadline, because we had to do this by the time the show started the next night.
Whoa.
And the show would start at around about, test runs around about sort of 4 a.m. and we'd be awake all night. And I think it was around about 3:30, and Brian Cox just moseyed into where we were working. We were all crammed in with the TV crew. And he just moseyed in, and he just minded his own business, and he just seemed like he just wanted to sit down and just have a quiet chill out. And he came and he sat down, and he got on his phone, and we were all sitting around sort of going, oh my god, Brian Cox is sitting at our table! Anyway, he just sort of flipping through his phone, and eventually he just kind of chuckles to himself, and he starts showing us memes on his phone on Facebook, of all things. Just random, I can't even remember what they are now, but they were kind of like really old memes as well.
Not even science memes?
No, they were just completely random memes.
Oh, wow.
And he just thought it was really amusing, and he kind of didn't really say much, but he just kind of showed us memes, and yeah. And then eventually just got up and moseyed off again. It was fantastic. Yeah.
Yep. You learn a lot of weird things doing a PhD.
You really do.
Around... Just because you're doing a PhD, not necessarily related to your topic of research.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have a lot more in future.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, what about my German sartorial elegance?
Why do I hang out with you?